Hi guys, welcome to the first session of this new year. It's going to be a new series and we're going to be looking at something which would be a nice project if you're stuck inside, which obviously anyone based in the UK and other parts of the world are at the moment. And that's to do an interior scene. So you can do an interior study in your house. I'm going to be working from a photo I've taken of my studio. You can work from a photo reference that you take, or you can work from life. If you're working from life, obviously you'd want to work similar sorts of time of day or with the same lighting roughly. But yeah, this is a great way to kind of stay occupied if it's maybe a bit too cold to go out and draw and you're otherwise kind of stuck at home. It's a little bit like a still life if you're doing an interior study, so you can see where I've got set up there. So there's a few different little elements within my my reference, some of my casts and some of my and one of my skulls as well for study. We've got some light coming through the window. A few different light sources in this. So one thing that's kind of interesting, it's a bit different from what we usually do because very often we work with a single light source, is kind of juggling these different light sources and creating a nice effect. In terms of detail, I'm going to be going for something pretty detailed, which is why it's going to be a multi-session drawing. But as always, building stuff up simply. But I'm keeping the materials pretty simple for this one. So I've just got some nice kind of slightly off-white paper, tape to take the paper up, which we'll be doing in a moment. Then I've also got a couple of pencils, a sort of blunter graphite stick and a small mechanical pencil. So it's just going to be graphite, this one. A kneadable eraser, which I always use for my drawings. And finally, just a little sanding block if I need to sharpen that graphite stick at any point. The graphite stick I think is about a 2B, and then the mechanical pencil is a B I think at the moment. So we're starting with sort of slightly softer pencils but not super soft. So let's get going. First thing you need to do is put your paper up. So in terms of type of paper, I'm using something called Teintentes, T-E-I-N-T-E-S. I'll put a link in the description. I'll also put a link to my reference image if you want to do the same reference that I'm working from. But definitely I recommend, if you can, work from your own, just because it's kind of nice to have your own little sketch of your own studio or space. It's quite a common subject. You see a lot of artists through history have done it as well. So I've got two pieces of paper, not because I'm doing two drawings, but because I am going to put a backing piece. So I'm going to tape up a piece of paper to go behind the piece I'm actually drawing on. The reason for this is it means that the surface underneath the paper is a little bit softer to work on, and you don't get as much of the texture of whatever board you're working on, if you're working on a board or from a board, showing through. You know, sometimes if you imagine like a rubbing, if you were to do a rubbing of a textured object, that shows through the paper, and that can happen when you're drawing a bit as well. So one way to make sure that doesn't happen is just to put some backing paper up underneath your kind of main piece that you're actually drawing from. Try and get it nice and tight as much as possible. In terms of size, because it's a graphite, I don't want to work too huge, so this is maybe sort of a bit bigger than A4, sort of a square A4 size. Just about there with my paper. I'm just going to re-tighten my easel. Pretty solid. So you can see my paper's up now, and the first thing that I want to do is just create like a little sort of bounding box. So my reference is a little bit sort of over square, so it's going to be a slightly different proportion to this paper, so I'm going to kind of block in slightly from the edge of the paper, give a little bit of a border, so something be about this size I think. See, I'm working very lightly. I'm going to be working very lightly with this bigger pencil all today, so you'd only probably just be able to make out this box. I'll kind of darken the edges a little bit. It's important with graphite that we don't go too heavy too early, otherwise it'll end up shiny, which is one of the kind of pitfalls of graphite over charcoal. But it's a nice kind of not too messy medium. It's a good beginning medium to work with. So I've got a lot of stuff going on in this reference. I'll kind of just swivel across, zoom in a bit so you guys can sort of see all the different elements. So we've got this chair in the foreground, computer, some paper, some casts up there, that skull, got a ladder in the background that's quite bright. So I'm going to have to be trying to balance all of these different elements and all these different tones. So for instance, this is going to be sort of white of the paper at the back there, spilling over the ladder, but then we've also got some probably pure white kind of going on in the cast that's being illuminated by this light, and this light is also going to have to be pure white of the paper. And a lot of the other elements in the foreground are going to have to be a bit darker, so the whole process, what we're really going to be focusing in on is this balance of tones, which will likely be fairly tricky. But before we get into that, I'm going to just start sort of roughly placing objects, and you want to have some awareness of perspective. So there's a few perspective videos on the OCAD course that you can have a look back at. I'm not going to be super strict with the perspective in this. I'm not going to block it out and do all the full perspective gridding, but you want to be aware of the fact that you've got sort of converging lines that go away towards the vanishing point. So some kind of familiarity with, in this case, sort of 2-point perspective would be helpful. But you can also do it by eye. So I'll mostly be doing this by eye and kind of drawing a bit on my kind of knowledge of perspective, but I'm not going to be super strict with the perspective. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to kind of block it into sections of the scene. So I've got this kind of little desk space on the left here, which sits below this wall, this edge of the wall. Behind that we've got the corner that has the window, this doorway, and then we've kind of got just the floor below. So I'm going to start to kind of block off maybe one section there, 2 sections, and this kind of 3rd, 4th section, just to kind of start to get a grip on what's going on. And I want to look for like what's in the center of the image. So the center of the image, center of the scene, is this edge of this table. So I can probably say this table's going to sit, table leg or table edge, it's going to sit somewhere about there. It's a bit lower than the middle of the drawing, so if this is the middle, probably find itself somewhere there. It's got that little box sitting on top of it. And then the front of it kind of angles back down and towards the left. So I'm just going to start looking for some major landmarks in the drawing. Today is just going to be a case of trying to roughly block in these shapes and these parts of the drawing, but not necessarily going into a lot of detail. Just the early sort of basic stuff. So I'm going to try to find this wall now, this corner. You can see how lightly I'm working, so I'm holding the pencil really far back, almost at the end of it, so I don't put too much pressure. So we've got that wall there. So misplaced my kneadable eraser somehow. It's fallen down a hole in my little workbench. So I just wanted to, I was making that line a little kind of more angled down than it was. But that's roughly sort of tabletop going on there now. I'm not going to put little things like the box on just yet. Just going to start to try to get these things roughly blocked in. So I'm sort of thinking of things as big cubes really at this stage. Now we've got this doorway on the left hand side, which just about reaches, kind of angles up and just about reaches the top of the drawing. If I follow this line, so this is using a little bit of perspective, I follow that line of the front of the desk. Roughly that appears to meet the edge of this doorway. And then from that doorway we've got another little angle back up. To this little step. Pretty much in the dead center of this section, we've got the easels kind of reaching up. So we can get that roughly blocked in. So it's starting to shape the sort of angle back, or some of the angles that are kind of moving back from the wall kind of angles in there, and then travels back where that window is, the dormer window. That's actually hidden, just slightly hidden behind the easel. So it's not super glamorous at the moment, but it's starting to get everything kind of blocked in there, which is what we're after. So we've got this table which is sitting at a slightly different angle. So this is the top of another table that's a little bit closer, which if you have a look at the reference you can get a slightly better idea of what this stuff is that I'm drawing. So again we're looking for that sort of approximate perspective. This is a particularly kind of complex scene, so you don't have to pick a room with quite as much stuff and as many angles going on as this one. If you imagine just having a single corner, that's going to be a simpler prospect than what I'm drawing here, but anywhere where it overlaps like this, you want to kind of erase so that all your sections don't crisscross too much, because they'll become a little bit too complex if you do that. Also just paying some attention, so here we've got this sort of light that's spilling in from the doorway. So this whole kind of doorway section is going to be lighter. So just about starting to get a lot of these things kind of settled down. As I say, I don't have to get all the perspective exactly right, or at least that's not one of my priorities with this drawing. You could do a study like this and go really detailed with your perspective, but in this particular case it's not something I'm sort of going for. Once you've got some of those kind of major shapes in, it gets easier to kind of start to sketch everything else, so I can now start to place some of these objects that sort of sit on the table. We've got this box. But I can use the sort of rough perspective lines that were already in place. Some of these other objects on the wall, they're a little bit simpler to place because they're not as rectilinear, so they're not sort of specific objects that have to fit exactly with the perspective, or kind of aiming to get it in line with the perspective. So you can just sort of approximately kind of loosely place them in. And I'm not actually, in this session, we're not going for shadows just yet. Or kind of big shadow areas, just kind of blocking in all the major shapes in the drawing is what we're after. So we're just about kind of getting there. Got the bottom of this table where the drawers will be, just there. Can drop down to where that leg is. Drawers. And sort of final thing, we've got a little corner of a carpet reaching down there. I'll do a slight kind of sort of accent overlay just to make it clear sort of where all the major primary shapes are being placed at the end in a moment. But last thing I want to do is I need to get this chair roughly blocked in, or the kind of seat of the chair. This chair's a little bit trickier because it's not an exactly flat shape, so I'm kind of simplifying it out to a more rectangular shape. before adding the curves in, so I'm sort of adding the curves in now. Oh, I might start it again actually, this one, because I noticed that I want the bottom edge of it has to be a little bit lower than this table edge. Top edge up here just about meets the table. It's a bit better, I think. So I had to take it back to be a little bit simpler, which is usually the kind of best bet if you're struggling with something you're not quite sure. Make it simpler. Makes it easier to correct stuff. So I'd made it a little bit too complex and it wasn't quite right. So I'm going to turn it back into yeah, so it's sort of captured that bow back chair finally now. Took a little bit of fiddling, that one. And it might take a little bit more kind of tweaking here and there just to get the fact that it's at a slight angle to everything else makes it a little bit trickier, and then it's curved, so we'll fiddle around with that a little bit over time. So yeah, that's just about all the important elements loosely blocked in, I think, which is what we're aiming for this one, this session. Final thing I'll do is just this. Got these kind of like triangular legs sticking out the bottom of this bench as well. Got a lot of funny shapes there, so we won't worry too much about them. Just get it kind of approximately locked in. So yeah, something like that I think is not too bad. I'll just go through and kind of accent those kind of most important shapes. Some of the other stuff like around here we're going to be got some stuff to fiddle around with next session, but it's just this first sort of block and we want. So important shapes are, we've got bring this wall across a tad. So we've got this wall, here, this sort of corner of a wall that we see. We've I'm going to do this a little bit darker but still quite fuzzy, this doorway, just because that's going to be a sort of fuzzy-ish aspect. The bottom of the doorway that's not blocked by that cloth can be a bit crisper. The shadow that falls, that can go a little bit darker. Then this tripod pole that reaches up, sort of back side of the tripod, the desk, the leg of the desk there, bottom of the desk, screen, back of the desk, and then finally I can just kind of go a little bit darker over this workbench. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this sort of first stage of the drawing. So this is a good place to kind of aim for in your first kind of pass over. Next session we'll be kind of adding tone over this, and then we'll be adding detail over the tone. So rather than going super detailed before going tonal, we'll be going tonal first. So finding there's kind of light pools where it's going to be a bit darker, and then we can kind of fit our detail within the tones. So yeah, this is what you want basically, just kind of like a line drawing block in of your subject. And yeah, that's the level of detail. As I say, you can use the reference that's provided in the link below the YouTube video, or on the OCAD course if you're watching OCAD. Or you can use your own reference, or you can work from life, which is sort of your ideal. Always working from life is the best thing to be doing. But this just gives you a few different options, and it should be a nice project to keep you occupied while you're kind of locked up at the moment. So yeah, that's it, and I'll see you guys next week.